Hello everybody, Mr. Habanero here, doing another different kind of video. I decided that I wanted to do another sort of in-depth kind of anime review today, kind of like I did when I did the Bofuri review. Now, this is actually not necessarily a review like Bofuri was last time. This is a little different in the sense that I've been kind of doing this thing where I'm going to label it as I'm calling it the great isekai exploration masterful adventure. I don't really the great isekai search, the great isekai quest. I am basically what I've been doing is I have been going around to a few different YouTube channels as well as some websites to basically recommend me some isekai animes, and I've managed to collect a pretty big list of isekais, and I've been slowly going through each one, ticking each one off as I go along. And what's been interesting is I have had my fair share of really good isekai animes, and I've had my fair share of stinkers. Yuck. Blech. Stinker bad anime. Really bad ones. And but what was really interesting was within the last few days, I sort of went through what was, and this is what made me want to make this video. I watched one isekai anime that was really bad, like really bad. And it's one of those things where once again it was kind of like it took me down the route of what Bofuri did, which is it started out interestingly, and I was like, okay, like, it's been 3 episodes, this is interesting, I'll stick with it, because that's my rule, 3 episodes. If you can impress me in 3 episodes, then yeah, I'll stick around. But then it did what Bofuri did, which was after 3 episodes, it got worse. It got much worse, and but I stuck with it, and I did that thing where I act like a crazy person, and I sit in front of watching an anime, and I criticize out loud by myself with nobody around me. Because I'm a crazy person like that. Just, yelling at a TV screen, like, why would you do this? Like, you shouldn't be doing this. You should be doing it this way. And, like, making criticisms and, just being a natural crazy person by myself. So I watched one anime and during my great isekai search quest, and it was not very good. And I had a lot of criticisms about it. And then what happened was I moved on after I finished that. It was 12 episodes. After I finished that, I moved on to the next isekai in the list, and it was a goddamned masterpiece. So, yeah, it was a masterpiece. Like the other anime that was not so good, it took me a few days to get through it. But the masterpiece that I watched after it, I watched it in like 2 days, and it was like 24 episodes rather than 12 because it had 2 seasons, and it was spectacular. It was absolutely amazing. But what made it so fascinating, and why I am here right now, sitting in front of you guys, doing this video, is because it blew my mind how all the things that made that anime great, whereas compared to the previous one, which was so terrible, they were basically both. How do I describe it? It was like as if what the one anime failed in completely to make it terrible is exactly what the other one absolutely exceeded in, making it a genuinely impressive, anime to watch. It was absolutely spectacular. And it was really interesting kind of like making those comparisons. And the major thing is overall, I will say that the one that was really good definitely told a much better story than the other one. But the thing that really stood out the most to me between the two of them was the distinctive difference between how they did their character building. And they were such direct contrasts of one another that it actually fascinated me that I managed to watch both of them back to back, where I watched the really terrible one first and hated it, and then watched the other one and it was amazing, and I could immediately tell that the differences that they shared that made one terrible versus one amazing were so closely related. Like it was like they met that fine line where, if the other one could have been that way, then it might have been better, and if the other one had met on the other side, it would have been terrible. Now, let me go ahead and get the titles out of the way here. So, the first anime, which was absolutely god awful, was an anime that was called Kenja no Mago, which I believe is in English titled The Wise Man's Grandchild. This is the one that I watched that was very not good. It was very obnoxious how much I didn't enjoy it, but it was obnoxious because of a very specific reason, which the other one, which I will be listing off, excelled at incredibly. And the other one that I watched that was incredible was called Gate. The full name, I believe, is called Gate, thus the JSDF fought there. And that was incredible. It was an incredible anime. It was absolutely spectacular. Multiple times while I was watching Gate, I was quite literally, I would be like laying back in a relaxed position and just enjoying what I'm watching. And they would get to these tense moments where I literally had to like sit up and literally sit on the edge of my seat, sometimes with my legs up in my arms, like grabbing to because of how intense everything got. It was fantastic. It was absolutely spectacular. It had me on the edge of my seat multiple times. Gate was an absolutely amazing story to find my way going through. And but the main thing that really stood out, which is like I said, why I'm here doing this video, is the major contrast between the two anime that made them polar opposites from one another. And that is overall character development. And it blew my mind to kind of have the two animes that I watched back to back. One, which is Kenji Nomago, which was probably one of the worst examples I've ever seen of proper character development, versus Gate, which is by far an amazing example of very deep, well thought out, carefully progressed and developed over time, and not even like in an incredibly long amount of time, just like over the time that the show expanded across. Just had these incredibly interesting and deep characters where they all had their kind of own motivations and plots and schemes and influences and reasons for doing what they did. It was fantastic, and it made every single character in the show genuinely interesting and fascinating. Whereas the opposite side, which is the other show I'm talking about, Kenji Nomago, did literally the exact opposite, where the majority of their characters were paper thin. Now, that doesn't mean that every single character they had was paper thin. The problem that I had with Kenji Nomago was that or I should say, the Wise Man's Grandchild, I believe is the English name for Kenji Nomago. Now, the thing is that drew me into Kenji Nomago, like I said before, you have to impress me with like 3 episodes and then I'm hooked. So they managed to pull that off. They managed to hook me with 3 episodes. However, what they gave me in those first 3 episodes was what seemed to be characters that sounded relatively interesting but could clearly be further expanded upon. They introduced, the main guy character who's your stereotypical isekai hero that, I'm a person who has passed away in the real world and then I was reborn in like a baby's body and then I gain all my powers and I'm way overpowered and blah, blah, blah. However, they managed to do him in a way that made him seem like he was relatively interesting. The main character of Kenji Nomago, I believe his name was Shin, Isn't that what his name? Or Shin something? Something like that is some Shin character of some sort. He's a Shin. He's on my leg. Um, Anyways, what made him interesting was they kind of gave this explanation through a few different episodes that he was using his knowledge from, the world that he lived in previously, the real world, where he understood the basics of science and chemistry. Now, I mean, it's not like as if he specialized in it. It's not like he was some kind of, chemist or genius or anything like that. But he understood the basics of chemistry and understood, like they explain it when he's talking about using fire for the magic, is that he understands that, you need to have the three different, stages, which is heat, oxygen, and fuel, which are the three things you need to create flame. And he basically was able to explain, well, they explained it through him, was that he understood the basic chemistry of how fire functioned, which was something that was not understood in the world that he was in. And because he was able to understand the basic science and chemistry of whatever he was manipulating, he was able to overall enhance the magic powers he used by understanding, chemistry and basic science. I thought that was really creative. I actually thought that was something that was very interesting, and I feel like that I have not seen that often in a lot of these kind of, fantasy isekai style animes. And that made him an interesting guy. And they kind of further developed that it was his ability to understand scientific method and chemistry and things like that that allowed him to be able to further enhance his ability in using magical spells, which was very interesting. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like, we have this character and you've applied some character traits that, although he's not hyper intelligent and crazy, ridiculous, overpowered automatically from the get-go, they kind of right away established that he was becoming very powerful because he had this information and knowledge from his previous life, and he was adapting it in a way that other people in this world haven't, which gave him the ability to become an overpowered character. And I was like, I like that. I like the idea that you kind of built this character with this relative level of depth, and you established him as being somebody who it would make sense that he could become overpowered because he has an understanding of basic knowledge in science, which he can apply to a magical world where people don't understand that, and thus he's able to become more powerful because he understands that. That was kind of cool. They also did a few things with the main character that, brought him out of the stereotypical tropes of your regular, everyday, teenage anime character, which, I also liked. I don't necessarily like it when animes follow all the stereotypical tropes of what it seems like every anime does. Like, he just had a different kind of attitude towards women, in the sense of, like, he wasn't constantly, you know, perverted or obsessed with, like, their women's bodies all the time. And I kind of liked that. I like the idea that I get really tired of seeing your stereotypical anime teenager always obsessing over and being embarrassed about women's bodies, because I don't know about you guys. I don't know how my audience feels about this. But when I grew up as a teenager, I wasn't embarrassed about women's bodies, like, ever. And I mean, I was around a lot of women in high school and hung around with lots of different kinds of women and had various different kinds of sexual encounters with women in my high school years as a teenager. And there was never a time where I ever felt embarrassed, by seeing women's bodies or anything like that. So, like, that's something that always kind of bothers me in anime, because I always feel like I can never relate to that, especially, like, even if I think back to when I was a teenager, that's not something I can really relate to. So whenever I see an anime that doesn't go that route of the stereotypical teenager that's embarrassed about women's bodies, I like that better, because I, like, as a teenager and even now as an adult, I don't feel that way. So it's kind of strange. But anyways, I mean, they do have some embarrassing moments in that, like, they do that, but it's not super prevalent. It's not in your face. It's not like the constant romance style slice of life bullshit that, you know, a lot of animes do in that fashion, where it's like, oh, I saw a boobie, like, oh no, oh, please don't punch me in the face. Like, they don't do that constantly, and I actually like that about the series. The other thing was they also had a very interesting lead role female character, who is named, oh god, that's right, she has the weirdest name. Sizzlian? 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 Sizzilian? Something like that. Something with an S-I-Z. It's Sizilien. Von Claude, I guess. Um, and she was an alright character. She was pretty interesting as well. And they developed her quite a bit, which made her a pretty interesting lady. And watching the main character Shin and Sizzlian kind of grow together and like learn about each other and essentially fall in love was relatively interesting. In fact, I actually kind of liked the fact that those two characters were very intertwined together as lovers throughout the story. And I liked that. I really did, because, like I said, that was unusual for these kinds of animes. A lot of these types of isekai animes are frequently harems, and it's usually that the main character is never particularly involved with any one specific lady. He has to kind of distribute himself across all the ladies, and him being involved with only one specific woman, which is Sicilian or whatever her name is, was fairly interesting. And I actually enjoyed watching the two of them grow together as characters. The next major character that really deeply fascinated me in the show was a character named August von Erlscheid. I have all the character names in front of me, so I can kind of try to give their names correctly, but they called him Aug, but his name was August, and I loved this man. Like, I always it's funny because whenever I watch an anime, I always try to figure out who is best girl. And while watching this show, Kenji Nomago, Wise Man's Grandchild, I was throughout the entire show trying to figure out who was best girl, and all I could do was, not once could I ever actually, and I will go deeper into it. I promise I will go deeper into it. I could not find a best girl. However, what I was able to find was a best boy. August von Erlscheid is best boy. He is the best character in the entire show. He's hilarious. He's interesting. He is a wonderful friend to the main character, and he's just an all-around fun, interesting character who's constantly getting into interesting shenanigans, but he also has a serious side throughout the show, and I really enjoyed him as a character. August is best boy. Now, after I said that, I now described to you the intrigue of Shin, the main character. I've described the intrigue behind Sicilian, the main girl character that he is romantically involved with. And I told you a little bit, just a tiny itty-bitty amount about August von Erlscheid, who was basically my favorite character in the show. So I went ahead and I said that I was trying to, throughout the entire show, figure out who was best girl. That is where the show utterly fails and just is really disappointed me overall. After those three characters, Shin, Sicilian, and August, none of the other characters mattered. And that was really sad to me, especially because one of the things that originally drew me into the show was I liked the fact that, when you're starting to watch it, they have this very wide cast of characters. Most of them are women, of course, but there's a few dudes in there as well. And it was a wide cast. And I got really excited about that because, right from the beginning, I was like, oh, they went into some depth about Shin. Oh, they went into some depth about Sicilian, and there's some depth to August. And I like those characters. So I'm really excited for you guys to kind of introduce me to each one of these individual characters, throughout the entire show, and really go in depth with them and kind of give me an understanding of who they are as people, what they're interested in, and things like that. And it was very, and I, like I said, I was trying to figure out best girl. You always have to have best girl. It's important. Every show has to have a best girl. So I was very disappointed to find that nobody outside of those three that I named off in the beginning had any depth to them. In fact, with sarcasm throughout the entire show, I would describe them based on very silly little things. So, for example, let me go ahead and kind of talk about a few of the other characters here. There's one called, this is the one that, there were two that I made fun of the most throughout the entire show. The two that I made fun of the most were a girl named Alice Corner. Is that really Corner? It is Corner, Alice Corner. And the other one was Yuri Carlton. Yuri Carlton. So let me kind of describe to you why I was making fun of these two lady characters so often. So Alice Corner, let me kind of tell you about what kind of character she is in the show. Alice Corner is a short blonde girl. She's short, she's blonde, and sometimes she's energetic. That's Alice Corner. Now you know everything you need to know about her. Let me tell you about the character, the girl character, Yuri Carlton. She has orange hair, and she has big boobs. That's it. That's all you need to know. Because that's all that the show gives you about them. So let me let's talk about a few of these other characters. So I kind of, like, those were the two that I made fun of throughout the entire show, every time. So, like, every time that Alice Corner would come on, I was like, oh, look, it's the blonde-haired short girl, whose character traits are being blonde and short. Oh, look, it's the orange-haired, big-boobed girl, whose character traits are having orange hair and big boobs. Cool. Let's talk about a few of these other characters. How about little let's see who this is. Let's talk about little Maria von Messina. So what are Maria's character traits? Well, she's the best friend of the main romantic girl character, and she has red hair. That's kind of it. It's kind of all I can really tell you about her. Let's see. How about this guy? Let's check out this girl. We have Lynn Hughes. Well, she's flat-chested and she wears glasses and oh no, she has a character trait. Sometimes she can't control her magic powers. That's it. This all you get to know about Lynn Hughes. She wears glasses and she has small boobies and sometimes she can't control her magic, and that's all you need to know. How about this guy, Thor von Flegel? Thor von Flegel. He is so his character trait is that he is one of the guards to Prince August, and he wears glasses. And they kind of make fun of him because he looks like a girl sometimes. But that's it. That's all you really get to know about Thor. Who else do we have here? We have Tony Freed. Was Tony the guy who used the sword? I think he was sword guy. So, like, Tony Freed, I think, was, like, the guy who sometimes used a sword, but, like, not all the time, but sometimes. And that was, like, his main character trait, was sometimes he used a sword and sometimes he didn't. And then we have a guy named Julius, and his character trait was relatively the same as Thor. He is a guard for Prince August. And that's kind of all you get to know about him. I think, if I remember correctly. I think that's all you get to know about him. And then there was, I'm going to go ahead and put these two in a pair because they're basically introduced and explained as a pair. So then you have Olivia Stone and Mark Bean. So Olivia Stone and Mark Bean, and the reason why I introduced them as a couple is because that's their combined character trait. They're a couple. They're like the two characters, the girl and the two characters, the girl and the guy character, that are introduced that have distinguished characteristics as being a couple. Oh wait, no, and Olivia Stone works in a restaurant and Mark Bean is a smithy? And that's it. So like I'm not going to go any deeper than that. They also have a villain who's kind of like a stereotypical villain. And I also got really mad with the villains because every few episodes they would like randomly introduce like there's like 3 or 4 villain characters with one main villain guy. And like the one main villain guy they kind of try to explain to make him deep, but in the end, he's just a jerk because he thinks he's been wronged by the world and thus he has to take vengeance on everybody. And like no matter how much they tried to kind of like they kind of like tried to make him like a Thanos style character where he's like, I'm punishing the world because the world has punished me or something like that. And like they kind of like try to make you feel bad for him. But I could never feel that way for him because he just sounds like he's just a big crybaby, you know? He never really grew to like actually like he was so obsessed with the idea that, you know, everything was everybody else's fault, so like that's why he has to punish everybody. And I was like, I don't care. Like I don't care if you think that that's like how the world functions. And like it's pathetic that you feel like that you need to punish everybody because some morons treated you really badly and you know supposedly quote unquote destroyed your life or whatever. So like he was a really lame villain who I couldn't like, you know, feel sympathetic for. And then the thing that was really annoying was then they would introduce these other villains that worked alongside of him, but every time they would introduce another villain, they would never, ever explain anything about any of those other villain characters. They introduced like a lady villain, and then they proceeded to tell you nothing about her. And then they introduced like a couple of other like dude villains, but like they never explain to you like who they are or like what they're doing there or like why they're listening to this guy who is this supposed sympathetic sob story. And they like you just don't care, and I didn't care. Like I just did not care about anything when I was watching the show. And like I said, like my favorite thing about watching the show was like pointing out that none of the characters had any character traits. Like I said, I was like, oh good, it's short blonde girl here to be short and blonde, or oh, it's big boob girl who's here to have big boobs. Like, you know, it's like, fun fact, being short and blonde isn't a character trait. Fun fact, having big boobs, it's not a character trait. It's just like, it was so boring. It was so incredibly boring. And they never ever went any deeper than that. The only characters that had any depth were the 3 that I named off, which was Shin, Sicilian, and August. And August was the most interesting of all of them. Like, I mean, they kind of got lame with Shin. Like, he was alright, but they never really did much with him throughout the thing. And then Sicilian's whole storyline was just her obsession with Shin. So, like, you know, it wasn't that fun or interactable. Like, I couldn't relate to any of the characters. And like I said, I just liked August. He was the best. He was, like, I could not find a best girl throughout the entire show, which made me really sad. I mean, I kind of liked, like, one of the characters simply because of how she looked, but, like, there was no development, there was no depth, there was no intrigue to the characters. So, like, I couldn't ever actually pick a best girl. And I refused to pick Sicilian as best girl, who was the only girl who had any depth to her in the entire show, and I refused to pick her as best girl because of the majority of her depth was her obsession with the main character, which is, like, you know, like, not that great and not that interesting. Like, I mean, they could have done more with her. Like, yes, she was the deepest of all the lady characters, but I mean, the depth wasn't that interesting or intriguing. So, the best character was Best Boy August. Because he was the most interesting character, because even though, yes, he was very good friends with the main character Shin, it wasn't like an obsession like how Sicilian was with him. It was more like they were bros, and the thing was that August was best bro. Like, he was the real bro of the main character, and he was constantly like the thing that made August such an interesting character was he was always like pushing Shin to like be better and do better things and be a better person and a better friend, and like and that made him cool. Like, I liked August. August is best boy. But no best girl, because who gives a crap about any of these ladies? They all suck. They're boring. So, okay. So I've talked quite a bit already about, Kenji Nomago. So that was kind of like, and I don't think I really spoiled anything. I feel like I haven't. So I'm going to move on to, now that I've kind of talked about how amazing, or I should say how amazing. Now that I've kind of talked about what Kenji Nomago was, now I'm going to talk about the polar opposite, which was Gate, thus the JSDF fought there. Now, this show was mind-blowingly good. Guys, this show was amazing. It was absolutely spectacular. I have never seen, like, an anime isekai that functioned like this. Now, I know that I've talked a few times about how amazing the show Log Horizon is, and Log Horizon is great. Gate basically told an isekai story from a perspective that I had never seen before, and it was fascinating. The premise of it is basically that a interplanar gate, like an interdimensional gate, opens up in the middle of Japan, and an invasion starts. And the idea is that whatever is on the other side of that gate is now invading into Japan. And Japan, has to react by retaliating in order to defend their country. And then in the process of doing so, fending off the invasion that is occurring in Japan, they make the choice to now travel through the gate and find out what's on the other side. In the process of doing that, they discover that there is a whole nother fantasy world on the other side of this, interdimensional gate. Now, unlike your normal stereotypical isekai story, which is all about one man who has died or magically teleported to another world or what have you, and then they're restarting their entire life in a fantasy world, Gate tells the story of Japan as like a real world country having to accept the fact that they now have constant access to a fantasy world. And they now have to basically come in and be like, they basically have to understand what's going on in that fantasy world, and they have to basically try to integrate it with the rest of real life. And the thing is that makes it so intriguing is that, basically they don't just have civilians coming in. They have to take it from the most realistic perspective, which is we have to send in military. We have to go in and send in, professionals who work within the Japanese military who can go in and understand the situation, scope it out, kind of transition over there and understand everything. The whole story is basically about an extremely complicated Japanese military operation moving into a fantasy world. It is so fascinating. It is so fascinating. The depth of them going into the depth of how Japanese military and politics go, adapting that into these so-called fantasy politics that are going on in the opposite world, the various interactions between, fantasy characters that understand a more primitive lifestyle alongside of magic versus a group of people who come from Japan who are very advanced in technology and understanding things from a military perspective, but have no understanding of, magic and the fantasy things that happen in this other world. It's amazing. The writer who wrote this story very obviously has a deep interest in fantasy and lore and things like that, but apparently it seems as though he also has a very deep understanding in Japanese military and Japanese politics and things of that sort, because the depth that he goes into in how the politics and the military operations function is absolutely amazing. It's incredibly fascinating. So the story itself is just incredibly well done. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. But that doesn't even, that's me getting beside the point of what I was even trying to really talk about in this discussion, which is the characters. In the story in Gate, they have this humongous cast of characters. Absolutely huge cast of characters, so many different characters, and they all serve incredibly important purposes in the story. They're all genuinely fascinating people, and they're all incredibly deep. They all have very complicated views, emotions. They have their own like lifestyles. They have their own sense of politics. They have their own sense of morals and how the world functions, and like what's, like some of them are more, warm-hearted people and caring people, and some of them are just cold politicians, like cold, like deep-rooted politician characters. And even some of the, like, and what's really fascinating too is that even some of these, like, they kind of like build some of these characters as these really well off, intelligent, deep, and like they're very kind of cold-minded politicians. And what makes them fascinating is that there are multiple stories where some of these very politically oriented characters that are very like factual, they're cold, they run routines, they're military oriented, they're very, very professional people, and what they do in the story is very dependent on how professional they can maintain themselves as. And watching every single one of these individual political characters sort of have a story where they kind of have to break out of their shell and be normal, emotionally driven human beings is some of the most fascinating things I've ever seen before. It's fascinating because like they so I haven't even talked about specific characters yet, and there's, first of all, the main character, who is named Yoji Itami. They just call him Itami throughout most of the show. Is this incredibly, they kind of like build you your stereotypical isekai character, which is he's like this otaku and he loves anime and blah blah blah, and it's like, oh, it's the stereotypical isekai character who loves anime and manga and is an otaku, and then he gets teleported to another world, and it's like that it's not that simple. Like, it's not. Itami is hands down one of the most interesting and deep main characters in an isekai I've ever seen before. So first of all, not only is Itami, like I said, an otaku, anime lover, manga loving character, Itami is also, first of all, a more or less, not necessarily retired. He's a military man. But as they develop him further on, like, you kind of, like, when you first meet him, you realize, like, oh, like, they kind of establish him as like this otaku type of character, but then they're like, oh, he's actually military. And then as you get to know him as a military man, they slowly unload what he is as a person, not only as like who he is as a character emotionally, but they also develop him as the, where he stands as a politician, where he stands as a military man, how important he is to, the military that he serves. And I'm going to try and not give up too many spoilers, but as the show progresses continuously, they reveal more and more about his exploits, like, who he is as, a person who works for the military. And every time they kind of give you that information, it makes him more and more interesting. And you start to understand, like, as they, like, because there are times where you see him do things and you're not 100% sure why he's able to act the way he does, or why he's able to, have the political influence that he has, or where he stands with his other military officials. And they slowly and carefully unload that on you, very, very gingerly, very carefully. And it's beautifully done. It's beautifully done. It's absolutely amazing. Because, like I said, they don't just unload everything on you about the main character in the first episode or two. They give you like a little kind of breadcrumb trail to follow, and then when the information is absolutely pertinent to understand, that's when they unload it on you, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's like watching a very interesting character where they kind of hint to you here and there who he is as a person, but you're not 100% sure. And then when you absolutely need to know the concrete details of who he is and why he does what he does, that's when they give it to you, and it just makes him so fascinating. He's such a great main character, and you can't hate him. Like, no matter what he does, there's never been a time where I've ever felt like, oh God, the main character is so annoying, or oh God, he's so overpowered, or like, good God. They constantly challenge him. He's not an overpowered character, but the thing that makes him interesting is that he does have influence where it's necessary, and he does have very specific sense of, power among his peers, as well as what he's allowed to do in any one particular situation he may be in. Makes him incredibly interesting. So let me move on from him. I could talk, like I said, it's tough. I really want to try and make this not too long, but I really want to kind of talk about all these characters. Every single character is as deep, if not more deep, than the main character. Easily. Like, they have, so my favorite girl character, and that's the thing, is I actually, unlike the previous anime, which I had no favorite, like, best girls, I had two best girls, and it was very tough for me to choose between them with this cast of characters. So my best girl was Rory Mercury, who is also known as Rory the Reaper. And oh my God, she is best girl. Rory the Reaper is best girl. So Rory the Reaper is I feel like it's not a spoiler. Rory the Reaper is basically an apostle for a god of death. And basically she's an immortal, and she's like, she looks like she's a little girl, but she's not actually a little girl. She's like something like 900 some odd years old, and she's an apostle for a god of death. And watching her develop as a character, and they kind of like, they never really touch anything too hard with her, but they develop her like sense of emotion, her sense of responsibilities, like what she plays as a character, as an apostle in the lives of the townspeople in the world around her. Like, what significance does she have? Like, what's the importance of the god that she does her bidding for? Like, they develop that as they go along, and it makes her so interesting and fun and entertaining. She ended up being my favorite girl. And there's a lot of depth to her. There really is. Then they have a magician girl named her name is a tongue twister. Lele La La Lena. I actually liked it because they had a character later on in the show who called her Lily, and I was like, I like calling her Lily instead of Lele La 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 blah 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 blah. So I just call her Lily. She's interesting. She has depth. She they show you where she grew up in. They explain to you like what she's interested in, what she spends her time doing, how she helps the people around her, like what she cares about, like what she, like what her overall goal is, like what is she trying to accomplish, and it makes her interesting. Every single character gets their own amount of time and proper development. They also have a beautiful elf girl who is named Tuka Luna Marsu, I guess. And oh my God, you guys. Like, at first, when they first introduced Tuka, I wasn't a fan of her. And then they tell you, like, they get into explaining, like, she has a whole storyline to her. And oh my god, you guys, it is the saddest frickin' thing. It is so sad. I was literally like sitting here watching the show when they were telling her story, and I was like, "Oh, little Tuca, you poor thing. No!" Like, "Oh, Tuca, why? You're so sad, and I just want to like hold you and cuddle you and make you feel better cuz you're so sad." Like, and like, but that's what I'm talking about, is the greatness behind these characters is that you can have that moment where you feel like that, like the genius behind Tuca's character, like, was that I literally felt like that, like there were multiple times where I was watching the show where they were going through Tuca's storyline, and I was like, I feel for this character. Like, I feel so bad for her. I just want to like wrap her in my arms and give her a hug and let her know that everything's going to be okay. You know? Like, none of the characters in that other show I was talking about made me ever feel like that. Ever. Not even once. There was not a single character where I felt like that I could like reach out and like try to like, comfort or talk with or relate to or anything like that. But there were so many characters in this one show that made me feel that way. And like I said, like Tuca was definitely like she has a very sad story in the show, and you just want to like reach out and hug her. Like that's literally what you want to do. And then they have like a character named Princess Pina, and I love her. I love her. Princess Pina Colada. And which is kind of like you could tell it's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek joke throughout the entire show that her name is Princess Pina Colada. And what's really interesting about Princess Pina Colada is that they start by introducing her as this character that they make you not like her in the beginning. Well, I mean, that's my opinion. I mean, I'm sure there's people who could disagree with me and be like, no, you can instantly love her, whatever. But they develop her as this character that you're not really sure where she stands. And she's very opinionated, especially when it comes to the politics in the world that she's in. And it gives you this kind of character where you see her have a very narrow-minded sense of understanding things, and it's like tunnel vision, like she doesn't see anything outside of that tunnel vision, and it makes her there are times where she's arrogant, there are times where she makes some pretty serious mistakes. But the thing is that made Princess Pina Colada so fascinating in the story was the whole everything involved with Princess Pina Colada is watching her learn and grow, especially from her own mistakes. She makes a very large amount of mistakes throughout the entire show, and she's constantly learning from them and bettering herself. Constantly. Throughout the entire show, she's constantly growing and learning, and it's amazing because it's what made Pina Colada, and she's my second best girl. Like I said, Rory the Reaper is my favorite. Princess Pina Colada grew. Like, I didn't like her at first, but she grew on me over time. And that's what made her such a dynamic character in the story, is because as you are growing to learn what's going on in the story and growing up with, you're watching the plot develop, you're learning things, you're seeing how the politics run, you're learning both sides, you're learning about the politics of Japan, you're learning about the politics of the fantasy world. And Princess Pina Colada is a character who is forced to, throughout the entire story, to learn. She has to adapt. She has to grow. She makes mistakes, and she must learn from them because she is the princess in the fantasy world. She has an important political standing among everything that's going on in the story. And it's absolutely necessary for who she is as a person and a political being within this society. It's important that she has to learn and grow. And what makes her so interesting is that as you're watching the show, you grow with her. And that's what makes her so deep, is because you feel like that you're seeing everything develop alongside of Princess Pina Colada, and you grow alongside of her. And it's kind of like, like one of the things that it made me think of is like when you're a kid and you're growing up and reading the Harry Potter books. And as you make your way through the Harry Potter books, you, like, a lot of people say that one of the genius things that the Harry Potter books did is that the people, or I should say the children that read the Harry Potter books, grew up alongside of the main character. Like, they grew in age, as well as in the process of reading the books, the characters grew in age, and you kind of like learned to grow alongside of the characters in the Harry Potter books. And in my opinion, Princess Pina Colada is a character that represents that in the anime. As you grow through the anime and you learn of what's going on, you're gaining the knowledge of like what's going on in the story, you know, what each political faction is trying to do, what each character is trying to do. And Princess Pina Colada is a character who is learning alongside of you. And it makes you grow to adore her, and you learn, you grow to care about her. She's a great character, and like I said, by the end of the story, she became my second favorite girl character, hands down. So the thing is that like, that's me going in depth about, what was that, 5 characters? And those are just the 5 main characters. But the thing is that there are so many other characters. There's Malt Sol Augustus, Zorza El Kaiser, Tayul, Bozisko Palesti. I just read this character's name and I couldn't help but crack up. There's a character named Beef Eater Katie, Beef Eater Catty? And I do remember her as a character, but I don't remember. I think they called her Katie all the time. I don't remember her being called Beef Eater. There's some name jokes that they have. Anyways, but yeah, Beef Eater Catty. Sherry Tayuli. Oh, Sherry Tayuli. That's another character I really liked a lot. And then there's Mizari and Takeo Kurata. Oh, Shino Kiribayashi is great. Shino is a fantastic character. Mary Kurokawa. So, like, notice how, like, I took the time to, like, kind of list off those characters, and right off the bat, I was able to, like, stop for a moment and be like, oh, little Sherry, and, oh, Shino's so cool. Like, that's what I'm talking about here. I was able to literally stop in front of a name and immediately just remember all of the development and all the reasons why I cared about one of those individual characters. Every single character in this show is like that. You just learn, like, to love each individual character because there's so much of them. Those characters that I named off aren't even the main characters. And some of them don't even show up until later in the storyline, too. They're fantastic, they're fascinating, they're interesting, they're deep. There's so much to them. They're just great. Like, the thing is like, and that's a part of it too, is like some of them feel like people, like real people. Like you can and almost all of them feel like real people. Like I said, like, you know, like I could imagine myself like wanting to like, you know, hold Tuka because I feel so terrible for her. And then I even pointed out there's a character named Sherry Tayuli, and like, oh my God, little Sherry. She was like, oh my God. That was another character that just really hit home for me, like for sure. But that's what I'm talking about. Is, you know, you can have these shows, like I was talking about Kenji Nomago earlier. Like, the deepest character development of one of those characters was that they had big boobies. But, like, here I am, carefully explaining each one of these individual... Like, the minor character, Sherry Tayuli, has more depth and intrigue than Big Boob Girl in Kenji Nomago. And, like, that's, like... It's just so interesting to me, because the thing is, too, is that, like, Kenji Nomago was 12 episodes. Now, Gate had 2 seasons, so it was about 24 episodes. But the thing is that there was so much depth to every single one of the characters that they did so incredibly well in only the first season, the first 12 episodes. So, like, considering that I can take a 12-episode show like Kenji Nomago and a 12-episode show like Gate, and then inside those 12 episodes of Gate, there is more information and more depth and more character development packed into those 12 episodes. And the plot's great too. Like, you know what I mean? So there's no moment in any of those 12 episodes of the first season of Gate where there's anything left out. They have a very specific amount of time to tell you a story. They have a very specific amount of time to develop the plot, get across the setting, explain to you each individual character that's important, and that has so much depth and so much intrigue, and you're drawn into it. And then you have a show like Kenji Nomago, which has one season, 12 episodes, like the first season of Gate, but it has none of the depth, none of the character development, and the story isn't even that great. And it's like you're watching it and they're wasting your time. And it's like, you have a very specific amount of time where you need to feed me as much information about each part, like each detail, each character, each plot point, each setting development. Like, you have a very specific amount of time. This show, Kenji Nomago, wasted that time. And they could have easily spent it to give you something deep and intriguing. Whereas Gate never wasted a second. Every second is packed full of information that you need to know about whatever is happening in the story. And like I said, it was very intriguing to me to have, like, that I watched the bad show and then immediately watched the good show, and I was able to kind of see, like, how each one greatly differed from one another for very specific reasons. And it was fascinating. Like, and that's the thing, is like, that's the kind of stuff that I search for when I'm watching shows like this. And it shouldn't just be like, yes, I'm talking about anime, but that should not be limited to anime. Like, I actually have a hard time watching a lot of television shows, like American television shows, because, like, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, I would say that a lot of the time, like, I can watch a lot of different American television shows. Yes, there are clean-cut gems out there that are very beautiful and very well done and well designed, but you have to sift through a lot of really bad television shows to find those clean-cut gems, And anime is just the same. I would even say it's even worse with movies. There's so many bad movies. And especially when it comes to movies, there's only, like I said, like when I was saying with Gate versus Kenji Nomago, like, you have a very specific set amount of time that you are allowed to spend to tell me what I need to know and why this matters to me, And, like, you can throw in explosions and fancy special effects and graphics or whatever, but the thing is that, like, for people who want something that is going to be memorable after their first viewing, like, you're going to have to work a little harder. Like, you can go out and see a movie that's just, special effects and explosions and, whatever. But the thing is that, like, when I hear about movies like that a lot of the time, like, most people say, like, oh, I don't even remember what that movie was about. And that's not what you want. You want to be able to have something that you can so distinctly remember. You can have so many memories tied to it. You can care about the characters. You can, like, enjoy the depth of the story that they're trying to tell you. And it's really hard to know that there's so many... It's so easy to produce a movie or a television show or whatever and not provide that depth and just make a quick buck. So... these were just, like I said, this wasn't quite a review. Like, I feel like I didn't really spoil too much at all. So I won't put spoiler tags on this one, but it was just something that really fascinated me, especially, like I said, the convenience of watching both of those back to back and them being so distinctly different from one another for reasons that I thought were very important. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this. I pretty much said my piece on both shows. And I would say, if there was any conclusion I could properly come to, it's that try to look for stories that have depth. Learn to love the characters. Like, find that story that engages your brain and really makes you think and is memorable for a long period of time outside of the first viewing. I would say try to avoid Kenji Nomago, Wise Man's Grandchild. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but it's definitely a show where you get to the end of it and you're just like, I don't care about any of these people or anything that they did. And I would say, in reverse to that, go and watch Gate. Gate, it's called Gate, Thus the JSDF Fought There. It's fantastic. It's intelligent. The characters are amazing. It's the politics are fascinating between the fantasy world and the real world. It's a great story, and I could literally not recommend it enough. So I am going to have to wrap it up here. I really enjoyed being able to do this, and I think this one was a bit longer than I originally intended, but I think that that's okay. It's about 1 hour exactly, and I hope that you guys stuck with it and were at least entertained by what I had to say. I'm going to say the last few things that I always like to say, which is, guys, if you enjoyed this, help me out, like it. Go ahead and leave me a comment. Go ahead and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Hit that notification bell. Doing those things really helps me out. It allows me to make more material like this, which I actually really enjoyed. I really enjoyed talking about this. And if you guys like this stuff like I do, it would really help me out to do those things, because that way it would encourage me to do more like it. And, I'll probably do it anyways, but a little bit helps every little bit that you can give. And it also tells the algorithm that what I'm doing here really matters and shares it to more people. So I really appreciate that. Go ahead and check in the description below for all of my wonderful links. I have a PayPal and a Streamlabs, which you can donate money to, which I do in fact use to further develop and work on my channel. I also have a Patreon with wonderful Patreon members, which include the amazing Ya Boy Lettuce, the amazing Bo Falcon, the wonderful Mr. Fajouk, the wonderful James P., the beautiful Miss Rebecca, and also my newest Patreon member, which I greatly appreciate, the wonderful Mr. Rashad. So thank you guys so much, my wonderful Patreon members, for supporting what I do here and allowing me to, keep buying new equipment and put more money towards the channel. I greatly appreciate you guys. You're so wonderful to me. So I think that the last thing I'm going to say, guys, is, you know what? Follow your dreams, okay? And also, go and watch some good anime. Go watch Gate after this, okay? Trust me, it's really worth it. It's really worth your time. I'll see you guys all later. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'll see ya in the next video or stream, wherever you might be. Greatly appreciate ya. See ya.